Ladies and gentlemen, the long wait is over. MGS5 is out. It's been released, it's been played by millions, it's been reviewed, and well, the reception has been mixed. While critics everywhere have praised it, awarding it numerous perfect scores, many series fans can't shake this feeling that these reviews seem to be discounting one of the serious flaws within the game: its story. While the gameplay in Metal Gear Solid 5 is the best the series has ever been, its story is perplexing. It's honestly the worst it's ever been for an MGS game, and for many fans like myself, that's a pretty big problem. MGS as a series can't really be separated from its compelling story. It's not just the gameplay or the stories by themselves that make an MGS game, but the two of them working together to craft one singular, unforgettable experience. And yet, MGS 5 is the first real MGS game in it, which the story is just plain bad, or even worse, missing. So for this analysis, that's what I'm pretty much solely going to focus on. I'm going to talk about all aspects of the story, from the plot to the characters, and explain what I thought about them, and essentially why they pretty much failed. Sadly, the stories and the characters is the worst thing to have ever come out of Hideo Kojima's mind. Almost everything about the story is a failure, but in order to fully explain why, we're going to have to take it apart piece by piece, analyzing every strain as we try to separate our Wolbachias from our metallic Archaeas, to comparing it to the past Metal Gear Solid games, most specifically Peace Walker, the game Metal Gear Solid 5 is most similar to. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. You see, I could tell there was something wrong with MGS5 just from the way it started. We wake up to the David Bowie song, "The Man Who Sold the World," and I just have to lay there for what seems like an eternity for one of the doctors to notice us. Eventually we wake up, only to pass out again, and then wake up, and then pass out, and then we're told we have to change our face before passing out one more time. This opening is painfully slow to play, and the face switch immediately had the player questioning their identity, especially if they paid attention to the pre-launch theories that had been around for over a year. Finally we get up, meet Ishmael in a gameplay sequence that plays out exactly as what was shown in the GDC demo a couple years back. Literally nothing has changed. I mean, there's even the same poster promoting Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes. If any player watched the pre-launch trailer and gameplay demos, then this entire sequence was spoiled for them, meaning they are bored from the very start of the game. Then after what seems like an eternity of this heavily scripted, heavily tutorialized opening that doesn't feel like MGS at all, the player meets up with Ocelot, who tells us we have to rescue Miller, who's been captured in Afghanistan. Cue the epic music, at which point we finally feel like we're playing an MGS game. What's odd is that no other section in the game is like the opening. Despite my complaints about the heavy cutscenes and tutorials, we never see a sequence like this again. We never get story details and cutscenes happening in such rapid succession. We never again have weird gameplay affecting psychological trauma. We rarely ever have another character standing beside us, and even then, rarely are able to have an actual conversation with the character. In short, the opening of the game feels totally disconnected from the entirety of the rest of the game, which is unusual for an MGS game. In almost every other game, the opening sets the tone for the rest of the game, often introducing new gameplay elements which you will learn to master later on. And most importantly, they tended to tie into the plot in a meaningful way. For example, Metal Gear Solid 2's Tango Chapter sets up the big opening twist and plays upon the player's desire for a standard MGS sequel. Nothing about Metal Gear Solid 5's opening twist is meaningful in any way, except for the fact that the player is later forced to replay it later on to learn the truth. But we'll analyze that part much later. Just reflect on the fact that this opening, which has a very horror-esque vibe, complete with eerie body horror, psychological hallucinations, and feelings of helplessness, is never explored or seen for the rest of the game. That is just odd. To really start off this analysis, we have to ask a simple question. Why does this game exist? If we look at the pre-launch trailers, everything we seem to be told and are shown is that we are finally going to witness Big Boss's descent into a full-blown villain. Finally, we get to see Big Boss become the villain we know from Metal Gear 1. However, there's just one problem. We already saw all of that happen already. Curiously, that game was actually Metal Gear Solid 5. Confused? I'm talking about Metal Gear Solid PeaceWalker. Now, maybe you never played PeaceWalker, or maybe you just weren't thinking critically enough about its story, especially the ending. But by the end of PeaceWalker, Big Boss has basically completed his character arc and turned into the villain we know from Metal Gear 1. It's why Kojima has always stated that PeaceWalker is Metal Gear Solid 5 in his heart. Think about it. By the end of PeaceWalker, you built up your own private army, the Military Sans Frontier, or MSF for short, into a massive force involved in conflicts all around the world. You got hundreds of men under your command, dozens of tanks, helicopters, and other support equipment. You've created and expanded a massive offshore facility to house all this men and equipment. You've personally accepted a child soldier into your organization and continue to train him to be a better soldier. And, to top it all off, you built yourself your very own nuclear-equipped, walking bipedal tank capable of launching a nuclear missile from anywhere on the planet. You call this mechanical wonder Metal Gear. Do I need to continue? Alright, so you say, that's just a physical build-up, not the evolution of Big Boss as a character. So let's look into that. In PeaceWalker, we see that Big Boss is already leading MSF, a private military force that fights in any conflict they can find. They don't care for race or ideology, only battle. Well, that already sounds like Big Boss's dream of outer heaven, except for the fact that MSF is small time at the start of the game, and Big Boss isn't exactly committed fully to the cause. Now, PeaceWalker is all about completing the character's arc of Big Boss, which started with MGS3. We know after MGS3 he grew disillusioned with the US government for discarding the boss, and manipulating him into killing his former mentor. Afterwards, he may or may not have been captured in San Guillermo, where he created Foxhound. Then at some point not long after, helped found the Patriots. By the start of PeaceWalker, he's left the Patriots and returned to the battlefield, the only place he feels at home. But throughout all of this, he still has not come to terms with the boss's death. There are still too many lingering questions in his mind, and he doesn't really know for sure what Evil told him was true. Thus we start PeaceWalker, where Professor Galvez meets with Snake, playing a tape with the boss's voice on it to Big Boss, seeming to suggest she might still be alive. And this begins a personal journey for Big Boss as he finally puts the boss's memory to rest and becomes his own man, for better or worse. You see, one of the main lingering questions about Snake about the boss's death is why she did what she did. Why did she willingly put down her gun and sacrifice herself for a corrupt and morally bankrupt government? No, not even a government, a small cabal of powerful men and women. What exactly did she feel going into the mission knowing her goal was to die? At the end of PeaceWalker, Snake gets his answer, and it's not one he likes. When the AI literally drowns PeaceWalker rather than launch its nukes, Snake understands that in the end, the boss laid down her gun. She sacrificed herself for peace. She gave up. Ironically, had PeaceWalker kept to its program mission and launched its nukes, Snake would have at least accepted this outcome as keeping with the memory of the boss. After all, that was the whole reason why her personality was used as a template for the Mammal Pod AI, because the boss would complete her mission no matter what. But in the end, the boss laid down her gun and chose to sing. This experience completes Big Boss's arc. He feels that such an action is a personal betrayal by the boss. For a soldier to lay down their gun and stop fighting, a choice he simply cannot accept. It is at this point he makes his vow to never lay down his gun, never stop fighting, and it is also at this point he accepts the title of Big Boss, throwing the boss's bandana into the ocean. In the final secret ending, we see the final piece come together. In the true ending, Big Boss has completed Metal Gear Zeke, stopped Paz from launching its payload, and officially declared Mother Base outer heaven. In his speech, he speaks to his troops about preparing to fight against the whole world, which might oppose their new world order of perpetual, privatized military conflict. Honestly, after that scene, the only thing left for Big Boss to do was to go back to America, leave Foxhound for a bit where he would train a rookie Solid Snake, and then said rookie Solid Snake to infiltrate outer heaven and destroy Metal Gear. I think what people tend to forget is that Big Boss, especially in Metal Gear 1, was not some monstrous villain, and he never really became one. His big diatribe was that he was building a soldier's paradise, a world where soldiers would always be of value, where war was constant and the battlefield always remained. Hell, he only began to recruit child soldiers in Metal Gear 2, and even then it was to feed them back into the system of warfare, not to abuse them, at least not in his mind. So this notion that Big Boss would evolve into some monstrous villain gunning down innocent civilians and not giving a fuck about anyone's life doesn't match with what we knew about the character before MGS5. Again, all he ever wanted was to create a world where war never ended, so that he and his band of soldiers would always have a place in the world. Think back to the plot of Metal Gear 1. Big Boss hasn't even threatened to use Metal Gear against the world. It's a secret. Solid Snake's job was to investigate Outer Heaven, find the missing squad member Gray Fox, and then figure out just exactly what Metal Gear was, and if it turned out to be a global threat, to destroy it. In other words, Big Boss accomplished all of this and officially became the villain we know and love by the end of PeaceWalker. There was no further need for another Big Boss-centered story detailing his supposed downfall. He had already fell. We just never thought so because we had been playing from his perspective the entire time. It's actually one of the more genius elements of PeaceWalker. Many of Big Boss's questionable actions are presented in heroic terms, creating an odd sense of dissonance in the player's mind. Let's just look at one of my favorite scenes in PeaceWalker. We have Big Boss, rescued by Amanda and her rebel compatriots, saving the day from the KGB's plot to nuke Cuba and blame it on the US. After they are done rescuing Snake, they begin to chant Vic Boss, elevating Big Boss into a legendary status with music that just can't help but make the player feel heroic.
Go! Go! Go!
Freeze!
Dare point your gun at a comrade?
We will not be pawns of the KGB. We will win our own victory!
¡Hasta la victoria siempre!
Amanda! We're home! Look! We're back in Nika! We did it, Amanda! I mean... Comandante!
Boss, you hurt?
I'm fine.
Big Boss.
Big Boss!
Big Boss!
Big Boss!
Big
Big
Boss!
Boss!
Big Boss! Big
Big
Boss!
Big Boss! Big Boss! Big Boss! Big Boss! Big Boss! Big Boss! Big Boss!
You're a regular Joan of Arc.
Nonsense. You're the hero here.
You saved my life. You're the heroes here.
I never figured you for a softie, Snake.
Thanks. It's good to see you.
But examine that scene more closely and what's happening, and you should probably be feeling a bit more uneasy. For instance, Amanda and the rebels are portrayed as the good guys throughout the game, but we know from what the game tells us that they are actually communist rebels who helped to fund the rebellion against an alleged democratic regime through the drug trade. They're an anti-American force we are meant to side with in a game geared towards a Western audience. But that's not all. The truly uneasy part about this scene is Chico. Now Chico is about 12 years old in PeaceWalker. He's a child who is trained to be a soldier and eagerly wishes to be so. In the cutscene we see Chico, a 12-year-old boy, finally being accepted by his peers, gunning down grown men as he chants "Hasta la victoria siempre." He even has a smile on his face afterwards. For this action he's rewarded and praised by characters like Big Boss. If that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable and make you question who's really the good guy here, I don't know what does. But the heroic nature and seeming righteousness of the player's cause through their own perspective seems to push these morally questionable parts into the back of their mind, or even worse, causes them to rationalize their actions, which is what the game wants. It turns building a nuclear-equipped tank into a fun little game, allowing you to fully customize and paint it before having your actions literally come back to plague you in its resulting boss fight. The better you make Metal Gear, the harder it is to fight in the end. So you see, we're already the villain by the time Ground Zero rolls around, to the point that we, a private military corporation, are hiding the existence of our nuclear weapon from the world. Now that is some villainous shit.
This, it is our only home, our heaven and our hell. This is outer heaven.
Such a lust for revenge? Ooh!
Well, despite everything I just said, that doesn't mean that another Big Boss story couldn't be told. The notion of a story centered around Big Boss and his comrades' thirst for revenge, which slowly consumes them, turning them into even colder, more inhumane characters, could make for an interesting story. But that's not what we got at all in MGS5. I don't think I need to point out just how little about revenge and its power to corrupt is present in Metal Gear Solid 5. Despite Kaz continually being an angry asshole, I'm just about the only person in the game that seems to show any emotion or seem to care about things. Nobody seems to really get upset about what happened to them. And Snake, or Venom Snake as we later learn, seems to be just the nicest guy ever as he saves animals, takes contracts with environmental NGOs, saves child soldiers and doesn't train them to be soldiers like Chico, and doesn't decide to rebuild Metal Gear. In fact, he can take on the job of helping dismantle nuclear weapons he acquires from rival FOBs. In other words, MGS5 seems to counter everything we did in MGS PeaceWalker. We actually revert as a character. We seem to only take contracts that support America's interests or are rather anti-Soviet. We can choose to dismantle nuclear weapons. We attempt to convince others that war isn't everything. We spare traitors. We work with our enemies. We give everyone a second chance, and we seem to be incapable of criticizing others of their actions. But most importantly, Snake is a passive character in this game. Now, even in Peace Walker, Big Boss seemed to be more of a follower than a leader, but that mostly dealt with MSF as an organization. As a whole, he was not a passive character. He drove the plot, he made decisions, he influenced events, he personally influenced characters, he made mistakes, and he fucking talked. The entirety of Peace Walker's story dealt with the emotional arc of Naked Snake, aka Big Boss. In MGS5, Snake spends most of the game reacting to events, doing what others tell him to and speaking very little. He doesn't interrogate potential spies. Miller and Ocelot handle that. He doesn't train or influence recruits. Miller and Ocelot handle that. He doesn't search for and accept contracts. Miller does that. Almost all the key decisions in the plot are taken out of his hands, and he's relegated to the role of a supporting character that reacts to what others around him tell him to do. Surprisingly, the plot is in no way centered around the character on the front of the box. But you know what? All of that wouldn't be so bad if the game could at least give us a villain to hate. A villain to really get upset about and want to take down. But we can't even get that. Skullface fails in every way at being a compelling villain. For the majority of the game, we pretty much don't get to see him except for a few brief encounters. Yet, most importantly, the major problem with him as a character is that we have absolutely zero idea what he wants as a character and a villain. We have no idea why he hates Big Boss or Zero, why he attacked MSF and what he's doing in Afghanistan and Africa, why his face is burnt off, nothing. Instead, we complete what seems like random missions until we get back to Afghanistan and enter a hilarious Jeep ride in which Skullface explains his plan and semi-motivations. Of course, we as a player are completely lost as he starts introducing totally new concepts like uranium-eating parasites, which is somehow tied to the distribution of nukes worldwide, which he never explains how he acquired, which he'll control all in an attempt to make the perfect world the boss envisioned by deploying language parasites that will destroy the English language despite us having no idea he ever knew the boss in the first place. And then he dies in literally the next scene. A villain so ineffective he doesn't even get a boss fight. It is only after his death we are given a massive dump of cassette tapes, which still aren't the whole picture, that explain after the fact just what the hell Skullface was trying to do. What? Am I the only one confused? You see, usually in a story the audience needs to know why they should be stopping the villain and why the villain is doing exactly what they are doing. But in MGS5 this is all given after the fact, and even then it's incomplete. When it's all over, none of the characters seem to have changed in the slightest. No one has succumbed to the toxic nature of anger and vengeance. No one slowly went mad by a lust for revenge. No, they all just seem to treat the whole thing as another Saturday afternoon. A slight inconvenience they had to overcome so they could get back to saving wild animals and continue their insidious takeover of the world. Hardly something to get nuclear about. While the revenge or downfall plot promising men becoming demons is certainly lacking in MGS5, it's not the only thing. Nearly every theme in this game is thoroughly unexplored or boggled in its execution. It's as if Kojima had all these ideas for themes he wanted to tackle in the game, and decided to throw them all in without really developing or exploring any of them. Let's take a minute here and list all the topics MGS5 attempts to cover. Child soldiers, limb loss and its resulting psychological trauma, guilt, sacrifice, anger, revenge, the loss of language and the forceful spread of the English language, racial tension, loss of identity, nuclear deterrence, the loss of an indigenous life in a war zone, environmental damage as caused by war, and the list goes on and on. Of course, the problem is that none of these themes are ever really explored in the game, but are rather thrust upon the player in a scattershot manner, oftentimes through one line of expository Ocelot dialogue. For instance, Ocelot tells the player early on that they've set up a deal with an environmental NGO to save animal life in the area, even going so far as to construct our own animal conservation platform. And that's just about as far as that goes. There really isn't much benefit to saving these animals' lives, and all you can really do is look at them at the conservation platform, which is totally separate from all other mother-based platforms, even having its own loading time. Thus, we have to ask, why is this even here? But this isn't just the small themes either. Even what I assume are the main themes of the game are also surprisingly lacking. Language, one of the largest themes in the game, is oddly underdeveloped. The theme was prominently talked about in one of the most recent trailers and leading up to release, and even seemed to be present in our very first real trailer of the game. We are told of Quiet, a sniper deprived of her words, and a man literally named Code Talker, all the while seeing scenes of these characters talking without being able to hear what they say, drowned out by the musical score of the trailer, a musical theme I might add that repeats the phrase, "words that kill," yet we never really see this theme fully come into fruition. The language parasites are introduced late into the game, and the plotline is almost immediately resolved upon obtaining Code Talker. Afterwards, we confront Skullface, who finally reveals in a convoluted manner what he was using them for and his grand plan before dying. Afterwards, the plotline/theme is placed on the back burner until it crops up again briefly in Chapter 2, where we are forced to kill nameless mother-based soldiers in which the infection has mutated. Again, after the situation is quickly resolved, this theme is dropped and the cassette tapes do very little to add to it. What's strange is that this theme in particular appears to have been a much bigger deal than what we eventually got. If you notice, every soldier you recruit in Mother Base has their languages listed, many of them speaking multiple languages. This cannot simply have been placed there for the brief sequence in which you must guess which members of your staff are infected and must quarantine them. It must have been there for some other reason. However, we'll never truly know, as the game never explores this or tells us why it's important that some staff members are fluent in Japanese and others in Spanish. Meanwhile, every staff member you encounter on Mother Base speaks perfect English. As I said, this is just another example of an unexplored theme alongside revenge, but as stated above, this goes with all the other major themes in the game. Chapter 2 is entitled Race and yet has almost nothing to do with race. The child soldiers take up a large chunk of the main story, but we never explore anything about them. In fact, we do everything we can to ensure that they don't return to being child soldiers. Limb loss is glossed over as a trivial detail that is easily fixed by either sci-fi bionics or parasite magic. In many respects, you're left wondering if it's not better to lose a limb if your replacement is a mechanical arm that functions better than your normal hand and does way more. Why is being burned alive so bad if a magic parasite can completely heal your body and take away pesky things like the need to have a digestive system, lungs, or even a stomach? It's all just lacking. Ideas thrown at a wall with no real meaning or purpose behind them. Lazy.
You gonna extract him?
Another puzzling aspect of MGS5 is the supporting characters themselves. While I have a great deal to say about Quiet, let's first talk about the rest of the cast. The main problem with almost all of the characters in MGS5 is that they are either written backwards, thus eliminating any character development, or are completely out of sync with past portrayals of their character. Some of them even behaving inconsistently in the very same game. Let's start off with Kazuhira Benedict McDonald Miller. He's angry. He, more than anyone, built MSF to what it eventually became, only to see it go up in flames, losing an arm and a leg in the process. But that's really all there is to his character. He's angry. Now, while it's nice to have at least one person in the game that displays at least some emotion, Miller doesn't really do anything with this anger. Snake basically ignores all of his mad suggestions and chooses the least dickish option available. What further undercuts his sole character trait is his alternating demeanor while in cutscenes, with that as an expository tutorial narrator on the radio. When on the radio, Miller often seems calm, reserved, and even sometimes joking. One scene particularly struck out to me. When Snake is given the contract to eliminate some soldiers who appear to have evidence on a client, he discovers they are child soldiers. Now at this point, Miller appears a bit conflicted on the radio. but reminds Snake that their contract is to eliminate them nonetheless. In other words, it would appear that Miller would be completely fine murdering half a dozen children. Yet, once Snake decides not to kill the children, he immediately chimes in on the radio as the gameplay kicks in, telling Snake not to let a single child soldier die or come to any harm or it's game over. Do you see what I mean? Later in Chapter 2, Miller becomes even more suspicious of spies, and seems to look villainous with those icy white eyes, and yet nothing ever really comes of this as well. If we move on to Ocelot, we see another odd treatment of a character. I can't have been the only series fan that was finally hyped to have Ocelot on our team. Finally, a chance to speak with this sneaky bastard of twists, turns, double crosses, triple crosses, torture, and all things spycraft, and yet we hardly ever talk to him. Of course, when we do talk to him, he's presented in the most blandest fashion ever. He has none of the flair of past or future games, and is oddly only ever seen on Mother Base. This is a man so feared and respected by the Mujahideen that they nicknamed him Shalashaska. Yet we never get to witness this. We're simply given a boring tape in which he explains how he got the nickname. Ocelot never leaves Mother Base, despite being one of the most capable soldiers and spies on the base, and thanks to the effective elimination of the codec/radio as a narrative tool, radio calls to him amount to nothing more than boring exposition and technical explanations about land features. So in effect, Ocelot is presented as completely the opposite of what we've come to see him over the course of 4 games. The only time we even see even a hint of his past and future personalities are in the interrogation rooms, and even then it's limited. He's just another static character, a cardboard cutout, who just seems unfinished. And then there is Liquid. Liquid, or Eli, is probably one of the most disappointing inclusions in this game, and I just wish Kojima had never explored his backstory any further than MGS1. MGS5 took what seemed like a complicated villain from MGS1 and turned him into a cartoon villain. It turns out that Liquid was always an evil little shit, and Big Boss or Venom Snake or whoever had nothing to do with his massive amounts of angst. This of course is counter to what he directly tells us in MGS1. Let's just listen in.
That's right. I'm just the leftovers of what they used to make you. Can you understand what it's like to know that you're garbage since the day you were born? But I'm the one Father chose.
So that's why you're so obsessed with Big Boss. Some warped kind of love.
Love? It's hate! He always told me I was inferior, and now I'll have my revenge! You should understand me, brother. You killed our father with your own hands! You stole my chance for revenge! Now I'll finish the work that Father began. I will surpass him! I will destroy him!
Yeah, so none of that happens in MGS5. Big Boss never chooses Eli for anything. He never treats him as some inferior clone. Rather, he gives him the utmost respect and tries his darndest to help the kid despite him continually trying to kill him. Now, naturally, you could say at some later point he meets back up with the real Big Boss, who treats him like shit but gives him the task of continuing his legacy, but that's just dodging the point, and it leaves a giant question. Why aren't we witnessing that part? Instead, we are treated to a one-dimensional Liquid who hates Big Boss from the very first encounter and never changes. Another character ruined by having their backstory shown and treated with needless, added complexity. That what we can only assume is the Child Mantis is treated the exact same way. Needless complexity to a character we really didn't need any further explanation besides what we got in MGS1. Finally, of course, I can't complete any analysis of the story of MGS5 without talking a little about the character of Quiet. Despite being pretty much the only character in the game to go through an arc, Quiet is still a terrible character despite some interesting design decisions. Mainly, I'm referring to the sort of unspoken bond the player develops between her by continually using her as a buddy. It's an interesting way of getting a player attached to a character without having any lines of dialogue happen between them. The relationship develops almost purely through gameplay. However, the rest of her character design and story is just a mismatch of ideas and actions that make no sense. Let's look back now. The first time we are introduced to Quiet as a character is the very beginning of the game when she tries to kill us. Now, we don't get to see a lot about this character, but what we do see does seem to paint at least some of a picture with the type of person we are dealing with. she's dressed all in black in her XOF outfit with long hair. She coolly proceeds to brutally strangle to death, which we the player can only assume are an innocent doctor and nurse before turning on the player, after which she again coolly reports in her status before stating she plans to kill you and the patient lying next to you. All of this paints the notion of an ice-cold killer, a person with very few morals who has no problem killing anyone she is told to, including an entire hospital filled with wounded patients and all the supporting medical staff. Now the next time we meet up with her, she's dressed in a bikini and ripped stockings, armed with a sniper which she attempts to use to kill us. Of course she fails and we spare her life, bringing her back to Mother Base. But after saving her life, her character seems to completely change, switching between two very different extremes. She's either a cold-blooded killer capable of extreme acts of brutality, or a sultry stripper saint amongst men who risks her life to recover a child's memento. She enjoys listening to pop music in her cell with her top off, plays in the rain with her boobs flopping about, and poses for Snake whenever he's there, presenting her ass and titties as much as possible. She even enjoys personally taking a shower with Snake as the entire Mother Base crew watches on. So I just have to ask, what the hell is with her character? Is she a cold-blooded assassin or some innocent cock tease armed with a sniper rifle? The game seems to have absolutely no idea, as it seems the only thing Kojima cared about when creating the character was how many toys he could sell of Quiet and her diamond dogs. After completing her final mission, we are given no insight into her character, but rather further questions. She states she was driven to them by vengeance, but she doesn't exactly explain who they are, or why she was driven to them, or when. Is she talking about XOF/Skullface? What vengeance drove her to them? Was it because we lit her on fire in the opening? Because that can't be right, because she was already with XOF then. So what made her join them before we lit her on fire? We're never told. It's not even really clear if she's dead at the end, because we know from the tapes she has no lungs, thus the virus can't kill her. So she would, however, be a threat to other people, but we aren't entirely sure about that either. In the end, Quiet is just a laughable excuse for a character who's mainly there to please the male fan base. We're talking about a character that Kojima intentionally designed only to survive because she's half naked and covered in water, and yet she's the only character that appears to have any closure in the game. And before I end this part, I just want to touch on one final point about most of the characters in this game, specifically those characters which will appear in future titles. They all seem to have this weird sense of precognition. All of these major recurring characters seem to already know their future fates and just play into them. I know I haven't talked about the final twist yet, but the final ending conversation between Miller and Ocelot just had me laughing. They begin to start spouting nonsense about how the sons of Big Boss will be important in the future, despite the fact that they should have no feelings whatsoever about these at the time unimportant kids. They even conveniently seem to forget about Solidus, all in an attempt to foreshadow MGS1. Why would Liquid or Solid be important in the future? Why must they break off into teams supporting one clone or the other? It all just seems to couch MGS1 in these almost predestined biblical terms, that these characters of Liquid and Solid are destined to fight against one another. Another example is when we banish Huey from Mother Base. Ocelot mentions how eventually someone like him will get what's coming, how he'll eventually realize what he is and pay for it. How could he possibly know such a thing unless he played MGS2? I don't know, maybe he did play MGS2, that's how he knows so much.
Now do you remember who you are? What you were meant to do?
Alright, it's finally time to talk about the biggest controversy surrounding this game, the big twist. I don't think it's of any surprise now, after hearing my thoughts about all the other parts of the game's story, to learn that I hated the twist. It's needless, it serves no purpose, and it just feels like one big M. Night Shyamalan fuck you to the audience rather than a carefully crafted reveal. The best thing to compare the twist to is, well, another MGS game that did something very similar, except better in every way. MGS2. You see, the idea that you're playing a carefully crafted Solid Snake simulation, that Raiden is a representative of the player, the idea that deep down we all want to be Solid Snake, and the subtle manipulation of an audience's expectations are all presented very well throughout MGS2. So when you get to the end and Ocelot starts revealing truth bombs, everything makes sense. You have that oh my god moment as you realize that he's absolutely right about everything he's saying, and you knew it all along. MGS5's twist is just lazy by comparison. There's no lead up to the twist. The There are no major breadcrumbs along the way besides a few minor hints, and it's something the player immediately expected the minute they booted up the game and were told to change their face to their own personal avatar. The twist doesn't speak to any larger theme, but at best clears up a minor question regarding the original Metal Gear games, mainly, how could we kill Big Boss twice? A question no one really ever asked or cared about. Yet even this reveal of a doppelganger Big Boss doesn't make sense within the canon of the game. The big problem with the twist is that it's so meta that it cannot possibly serve as an in-universe explanation. What I mean is that Venom Snake is not a character like, say, Raiden was. Venom is instead a direct cipher, if you will, for the player. That is why he speaks very little during cutscenes. This is why he simply follows and reacts to what people tell or do to him. It's why he just doesn't seem human. Venom Snake is purely the avatar of the player inserted into the Metal Gear universe, but unable to actually change anything. They are allowed to play out sequences in a set order, but they aren't allowed to direct events or participate in big decisions. So when the game implies at the end that the big boss in Metal Gear 1 wasn't actually the real big boss but a body double, the logic of the universe falls apart as it tries to reconcile this meta twist with the fiction of the universe. The game is essentially saying that Venom Snake both is and is not a real character. You see, if Venom Snake is an actual character, as in the medic from Ground Zeroes who is turned into Big Boss and serves as his body double for a number of years, running outer heaven before being killed by Solid Snake, then we run into a series of questions that cannot possibly be answered. For example, how does there exist technology to completely change a person's face and body into that of Big Boss? We're talking about technology that can turn a black person white or an Asian into a Caucasian. How does Venom have any of Big Boss's memories? The game says that Ocelot uses hypnotherapy to convince Venom Snake that he is Big Boss, but even if that hypnotherapy could implant memories, which is a major stretch, it still wouldn't explain how he would have so many memories of things he shouldn't have. Ocelot wasn't there to witness the majority of Operation Snake Eater. He wasn't present with Snake at all for Portable Ops, and I doubt the medic from Ground Zeroes was secretly there for the private moments in PeaceWalker. Yet we are told to accept that Venom Snake is able to convincingly operate as Big Boss because he supposedly has all these memories. He doesn't question just who the hell Ocelot is or what the hell Miller is talking about when he mentions Cypher. Now, as a pure avatar for the player, this makes sense. Ocelot wasn't present for much of Snake Eater or PeaceWalker, but we as the player were. We played all those games and we have all those memories. We know who Ocelot, Cypher, and Major Zero are, and we don't have to ask these questions. But when the twist actually turns Venom Snake into an actual in-universe character that exists after the events of the Phantom Pain, then this explanation cannot serve and must be answered in some fashion. But it never is, and it never can be. This leads to further questions as to why some medic happens to be just as fucking legendary at combat in CQC as the real Big Boss, or why he would continue to follow some maniac after learning he forcefully and without his consent changed his entire face and body so that he could be used as a cannon fodder decoy. Who would smile upon learning such a truth? I think you understand what I'm getting at. Compare this to Raiden at the end of MGS2, who becomes his own man and forcefully discards the role of the player's avatar. He throws away the name we give him and becomes his own man, his own character. Venom meanwhile seems to enjoy being the player's avatar and later Big Boss's decoy. The twist serves no purpose other than to have a twist, shoehorning in some concept about how we the player have always wanted to be Big Boss and help craft the legend of the character as much as Kojima. Of course, even that isn't true. Unlike Solid Snake, I doubt any sane-minded player wishes to be Big Boss. Solid Snake was a smooth-talking, sarcastic badass who routinely put his life on the line to save the world. He embodied the allure of the noble spy. Big Boss, on the other hand, is a megalomaniac who seeks to create a world in which war is constant, as it's the only way he can maintain a hard-on. He's not exactly a figure to be emulated. No, the player has always sought to examine and witness this character's origins and downfall, but unlike Solid Snake, we don't harbor some secret desire to embody his life. We don't want to be his phantom.
It's defined by the era we live in. We will sometimes have to sell ourselves and services. If the times demand it, we'll be revolutionaries, criminals, terrorists, and yes, we may all be headed straight to hell. But what better place for us than this? It is our only home, our heaven and our hell. This is outer heaven.
When all is said and done, The Phantom Pain may prove to be the most apt title for this game, because nothing about this game feels finished. We're left with a continual feeling of anger and pain towards things that aren't in the game. Unexplored themes, character arcs that never happen but we know will eventually appear in later games, major time skips in which important events happen that we don't get to witness, a 2-chapter game in which we have proof of a 3rd chapter that was cut, and knowledge that the last 2 games had 5 chapters or acts. Now, I don't want to give Kojima too much credit, but if this feeling was intentional, then his mission was accomplished. But I doubt it. If MGS5 proved anything, it's that Kojima is bored with the series. MGS4 was clouded by the feeling of frustration, and MGS5 just feels like the final boiling over point of this feeling. Kojima said everything he needed to say about the character Big Boss and PeaceWalker, and with MGS5 was just dying to work on a new game that he could explore new gameplay ideas. This little quote at the end sort of sealed the deal for me. Facts do not exist, only their interpretations of them. Kojima is basically telling the player that you can't really accept anything that happened in the game as fact. To basically choose your own canon because it's just as valid as the convoluted nonsense he's put in the game. The last time we saw him directly state such an idea was MGS2, when he truly believed that he would be done with the series, and it seems like, at least this time, it looks like he'll get his wish. But don't be sad. If you feel like you still want MGS5, then it already exists. Just go play PeaceWalker again. In fact, let's just listen to another awesome moment from PeaceWalker. Just listen in.
If you know the name Big Boss, then maybe you were there at the ceremony when I received the title from President Johnson.
Indeed I was. We don't have time for this bullshit! Hold it! Let's hear him out. You were saying?
At the ceremony, the DCI tried to shake my hand. I refused. What happened in that room is classified, top secret. Only a handful of people would know.
He's making it up! Don't listen to him! Wait! Why did you refuse to shake his hand?
Because I knew where my loyalty belonged.
Such a lust for revenge?